Hey everyone, how's it going today? Welcome back to another third stimulus check unemployment benefits extension update. So as most of you guys know is that at this current time there are obviously a lot of lawsuits that have been popping up. Thankfully one state has now officially won their lawsuit at this time. Of course the case is still opened and there's a lot of other states that have now brought up their lawsuit, but we already talked obviously all about that in a previous video which I literally just made. I think it's the last video, called Incredibly Great News, so we won't talk as much about that. I'll put it at the very end screen if you guys haven't checked it out yet. But the idea right now is that we actually have recently received a lot of actually surprising information about what has actually physically happened in a lot of the states that have ended their unemployment program earlier than had anticipated. Because as most of you guys probably know is that the reason that they gave for why they wanted to end unemployment was because they wanted to incentivize people to go back to work, right? And so there's a lot of new surprising information right now that has come out, and these are all actual numbers about what has actually physically happened in a lot of these states, because a lot of new data suggests that, interestingly, they've wanted to do this to kind of incentivize people to go back to work, but in some states it's actually surprisingly not necessarily happening. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I also want to maybe talk about whether or not how this is going to impact if unemployment can potentially come back, not just on the legal side again that we talked about in the last video, but also maybe about the economic side, because there's a lot of research that suggests right now is that ever since ending unemployment, it's actually impacted both sides actually. Obviously a lot of us, because a lot of us are literally being kept because of the unemployment. But interestingly, even on the businesses side as well, while the unemployment rate has actually interestingly started to fall down, but it kind of does actually logically make sense, because as most of you guys know, if you guys have been here for a while, is that last year, or ever since the pandemic started, about 40 something million people have been on unemployment at some point. And it's actually even more than that, because there were also a lot of people that have been unemployed but had actually struggled to physically get onto the unemployment program for a whole bunch of various reasons. Maybe feel free to share if you happen to go through anything similar, because there were a lot of people that went through that, and so they were not fully counted inside of the statistic. But it's because of what's been going on, which actually does absolutely make sense, because if you have 40 something million people that are unemployed, only so many more people can be unemployed, because it comes to a point where almost everyone that is pretty much in danger or just basically on the verge of unemployment finally actually does go on to unemployment. So we're going to talk all about that in today's video, but as always, before we begin, remember to smash the like button in light of the fact that we're at least starting to see a lot of progress. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell if you guys are brand new here for videos similar to this, and huge thanks if you guys have been here for a while, and as always, feel free to comment any questions, thoughts about honestly just really anything. So with that being said, let's get this video started. So the story to what's going on right now is that there's a lot of new data that has actually recently come out to really suggest that what's going on right now is that it's been really interesting actually, because even though a lot of governors, originally planned to do this because they were trying to incentivize people to go back to work, but it was now actually released that apparently it seems that in a lot of the states that have actually physically ended their unemployment early, there actually turns out hasn't really been a massive difference between the number of people that have basically been starting to try to apply to work. And so I think the significance of what this really means is that because it was believed that a lot of people have been trying to stay on unemployment because they're trying to basically stay on it to kind of get, as some people suggest, the free money, and so they're trying to avoid to work. But what this basically shows is that it may actually be that a lot of people are staying on unemployment because of very legitimate reasons. And it makes sense, because there's a lot of people, for example, that, have to deal with basically childcare because, schools are just starting to go back, or at this point it's summertime, but at the given time period, schools were starting to kind of make the adjustment. There are still some people that are going through health concerns, but I think also is that because a lot of industries are still still very, very much recovering from it. There is also still a lot of personal struggles to actually try to physically find work, but even more specifically, work that actually pays an affordable wage and that actually is related to the work that they're trying to do or the industry that they're basically actually physically in. And it's not really necessarily even an option, because it kind of goes on to another data that recently came out that apparently shows is that even though many employers have been trying to look for employees, it's also been noted that there's also been a lot of employers actually that have actually struggled to find employees, but specifically employees that are actually physically qualified to do those particular jobs. And then the few employees that they've managed to find, many of them are not actually physically accepting or taking the job once they actually physically receive the physical job. And I think it's largely, again, going back, is that it really just has to do with the wages, what that physical job is, and really just trying to make a livable wage, and to do so in a relatively safe and environment that I think most people would want to be able to be in. But the part I think that's probably really particularly interesting is probably about how unemployment has actually impacted a lot of states on the economic level actually. And I think this is probably the part that's going to relate to why they may potentially try to reverse unemployment. But because a lot of research has actually shown is that, and it kind of makes sense a lot of times, is that the irony is that a lot of businesses are trying to force people to go back to work according to the governors that have, ended unemployment. It's actually causing a lot of people now to spend even less money, and in a way it's actually slowing down the economy or the growth of the economy to what they originally believed. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, because simply put it, out of the logic, is that if you give people money, then they're more likely to spend more money, which is why spending actually increased over the last couple of months because of all of the stimulus checks. And it's also probably where you get the name of why the stimulus check is called the stimulus check, because it's meant to stimulate the economy. And in order to stimulate the economy, people have to actually physically spend money and try to actually use it, to buy things. So what a lot of new data is interestingly suggested is that ever since they took away the unemployment program, it's actually caused less spending to happen, and it's actually started to slow down the growth actually even more. So now actually the irony is that workers are trying to, or employers are trying to get people to go back to work, but now because of what's been going on, there's actually physically less business that's actually physically happening. And I believe that the belief right now is that by ending unemployment, aside from the fact that there's probably a lot of people that are literally on their last couple of strides, it's also showing that within businesses themselves, there's probably about at least $12 million worth of business activity that is actually basically now just leveled off, or just is not really there now because of what has ever since happened to everything that's been going on. And so the idea and significance of this is that while it is true that there's a lot of lawsuits that have been happening, and I think that that's something that we hope more states are able to win, well, we already of course talked about that in the last video, which I'll put it at the very end screen, but the idea is that based off of a lot of this, there is actually a reasonable chance to suggest that there may actually be some states that maybe if they're able to see it this way, in this light, maybe consider to reverse their decision in order to kind of bring back the economy to kind of recover. Because at the end of the day, what's going on right now is that really actually both sides in a way are being hurt by what's going on. And I think that it's not really a clear black and white answer. So if they're able to do this, maybe it'll give them a reason also to try to change up or reconsider what they're currently doing right now. Personally, if I had to make a particular opinion, I actually really do believe what a lot of states should be doing in order to try to get people to go back to work is probably to try to do a lot of the back to work bonuses. Now, the great news is that a lot of states are doing that, and actually even more states are starting to join in that. I'll probably have to talk even more about that in a future video, so maybe consider subscribing and hitting the bell if you guys are brand new here, or stay tuned for that. And huge thanks if you guys have been here for a while, because I think that that's going to be a little bit more of an insightful one. But But beyond this is pretty much what I really just wanted to share in today's update, to kind of talk about something maybe a little bit more interesting outside of like all the lawsuits and everything that's been going on. If you guys found this relatively insightful, maybe consider smashing the like button, consider subscribing as we just mentioned, you know, if you guys are interested. And as always, feel free to comment any questions, thoughts about honestly just really anything, or even any stories if you guys have anything that you particularly noticed about everything that's been going on. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.